two ways. Like reseeding is probably the gold standard method to put it in clover, but you can also do it through oversown. So generally, look, it does work best doing it earlier in the year compared to autumn. Autumn can be a bit more difficult to keep clover contents good because it might get a little bit heavy before the winter and you might not get it grazed off at the right cover. So get it in earlier in the year, whether it be oversown or reseeding, you have a better chance to keep the covers right and get your post-emergent spray and keep that clover in the sward.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's bonus episode from BEEF2026, I'm joined by Teagasc Researcher Peter Doyle and Grass Tin Advisor Nikki Kennedy to discuss the grazing demonstration here at BEEF2026 in Teagasc Grange. Nikki, what is the demonstration on grass here at BEEF2026 today?
Yeah, we've taken a slightly different approach this year. So we're looking not only at a grass demonstration in terms of sort of optimizing grass growth, but really linking that into cattle performance. So we have demonstrations there on grass-clover swards versus grass-only swards, as well as demonstrations there of different pre-grazing yields and the sort of effect that has on performance and the post-grazing residuals you're able to achieve.
The demonstration that's focusing on the pre-grazing and post-grazing sward heights that you mentioned, Nikki, why are them targets so important?
Yeah, so I guess the pre-grazing yield is one we often focus on, and that's really important there. In terms of it's a big determinant of sward quality. So you get to a point, and if your yield goes too high, you start losing quality. There's far more fibre in there, as well as it doesn't let cattle have the chance to graze it out properly because of that extra stem and fibre. So not only do you have the reduced sort of quality in that first grazing, but it sort of affects it every grazing onwards because of poor graze outs.
And the ideal cover, what is that kind of target, and when are you saying it's gone too strong?
Yeah, so we're looking at that pre-grazing yield of about 1,500 kilos of dry matter per hectare. We're seeing in that we've worked there from Peter and other researchers here in Grange. So the 1,500 kilo pre-grazing yield versus the 2,500, which would not be uncommon on a lot of beef farms. There's a lot of cattle grazing those heavy covers. Like you're looking at a 16 kilo live weight difference between those cattle in the second grazing season alone. So you're leaving kilos on the ground there when you're grazing two heavier covers.
I suppose this year has been a very difficult year with regard to grazing, and farmers had to make a lot of difficult decisions because of the variation there has been in growth. How do you decide, whether to take a paddock out for silage or whether to keep it in the grazing rotation?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and it's not only variable grass growth, it's ground conditions, which obviously vary a lot across the country, and it's different for every farmer. So there's no real one size fits all. But I guess particularly on the variable grass growth, that's why it's just so important to sort of know what your farm is doing, know what your demand is, sort of roughly how much you're actually getting through every day, and then sort of boots on the ground, looking at your farm and just keeping a good track as to where grass growth is. If you're finding that there's lots of heavy covers, it's probably an indicator to take paddocks out. But you can look at sort of days ahead and roughly in your head, whether you're measuring grass or not, you can look at how many days ahead. So if you sort of go around the different paddocks on your farm and see how long would this hold cattle for. At the moment, you're looking that what the farm has at this minute is looking about 12 to 14 days ahead. If you have any more than that, you're just going into two heavier covers. So you need to start taking things out either as bales or just close them up to go in with the main cut of silage.
That's great, Nikki. And I think one of the key indicators you mentioned there, like the weather has had a huge impact, and farmers are starting to graze heavier covers to avoid damage.
Yeah, and look, sometimes the paddocks you want to graze because the grass is right in them, the ground might not be right in them. And look, yeah, you sort of have to give and take a bit where things aren't ideal. So it's all about making the most of it. But yeah, where we can, we like to graze the right grass, but you have to be conscious of those conditions as well. So that will factor into it. It also might factor into the fact that you might not be able to get the cleanest graze out that you'd be looking for. So that might also factor into, say, maybe the next time round, if it has gone too heavy, getting a cut of bales on that will not only sort of correct the grass for everything else ahead of you, but it'll take that quality, bring that quality back in by just cleaning out a field that was in poor condition.
Peter, Nikki mentioned there the grazing demonstrations, you're comparing grass only versus grass-clover swards. What performance differences are being achieved?
Yeah, no, thanks, Catherine. Look, we've done I suppose, a number of different experiments now on grass versus clover swards in a few different suckler systems. One we done there a few years ago was a wheeling to beef system. So the wheelings were put out, say, at 12 months of age onto a grass only, and the other half were put onto grass white clover swards. And over that second grazing season, they gained an extra 23 kilos of live weight on the grass white clover swards compared to the grass only swards. So an extra 0.1 of an average daily gain a day. And that resulted in a 14 kilo carcass weight gain in favour of those in white clover. Also, a good few years ago, Eddie O'Riordan done it in a store to beef system, and he also got a similar response for those cattle, say, stores over the third grazing season. And again, there was an 11 kilo carcass weight difference there by the end of the grazing season. And I suppose more recently, then, as part of Peter Bennett's Watt Scholar thesis work, he was looking at grass versus grass white clover and red clover silage in a full, say, calf to beef system. And what Peter Bennett was seeing with his results is that those on grass white clover swards, at the point of weaning, calves are 14 kilos heavier at weaning than the calves that are on grass only swards, and with the cows being about 16 kilos heavier at weaning on the white clover swards. Again, then when he brought him in on red clover silage, the second and third cut, red clover silage does deliver extra performance of 0.1 of an average daily gain due to higher intakes on the red clover silage compared to the grass silage. But that's only really for second and third cuts, where clover contents are generally higher. You wouldn't really get much of a difference in first cuts. But all in all, in Peter's study, he's also, by the time they're brought through to beef, he's getting around, I suppose, an 11 kilo carcass weight difference too. So I suppose the results are quite consistent from all the different systems and studies.
And it's not just performance differences, Peter, like there's potential fertiliser savings from incorporating clover into grazing seasons, particularly white clover.
Yeah, so on the Derry Patrick system, we're stocked at 170 kilos of organic gain, so it's quite intensively stocked for a suckler farm. So the grass only system be getting around 150 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, which is 120 units of nitrogen. But the clover ground is receiving half of that fertiliser. So yeah, we're saving around 75 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, or say 60 units on our clover swards. So that's worth €150 per hectare for us. So across an 80-acre farm, that's $5,000 saving in nitrogen fertiliser, which is obviously a great saving there. And look at, I suppose, the main saving of that is from this time of the year on. We would have been applying a relatively similar amount of fertiliser on our grass white clover to grass only swards, say in spring, and there's not much nitrogen fixation. But now with the increase in temperatures, there's a lot more nitrogen fixation happening from the clover. So it's now when we save on the fertiliser.
That's significant difference in the saving from fertiliser, Peter, and also the performance differences. How else can grass clover swards help, particularly from an environmental sustainability aspect?
Yeah, so I suppose the main thing is I look at it, it's the saving on greenhouse gas emissions around the nitrous oxide emissions. That say they're the emissions that would be mainly associated with making and spreading the fertiliser. So based on Paul's Crossland's model, at the moment we have estimated that the clover swards are probably about 6% lower greenhouse gas emissions than the grass system. But look, we'll be looking at that again as we get more measurements back from Peter Bennett's study. So look, there is obviously a greenhouse gas emissions saving there as well. And look, generally in all in the full profitability of the two systems, both the fertiliser saving and the the extra annual performance. Look at our net margins this year, based on the beef price this year, we're saving about, I say, an extra €110 per cow unit, say, in terms of financial performance for the clover system compared to the grass system.
For farmers that's considering introducing clover on their farm, what are the first steps that you'd advise, particularly for someone that might never have put in white clover previously?
Yeah, well, I suppose, look, at the first thing is you have to walk before you can run. So the main thing is having that basic grazing management in place. Like, you have to have the soil fertility very good in terms of P's and K's indexes are up at 3 and pH is up near 6.5, because if your soil fertility is not right, your clover is not going to work. Also just having the correct I suppose, look, the grazing infrastructure in place. It's well suited to paddock systems, getting in at the right covers and grazing out at the right post height. If it gets real heavy covers, the clover can turn to get shaded out and can die out. So, having to grazing management there. But look, there's a number of ways too. Then once you get your grazing management right and your fertility right, you can look maybe about putting in clover. Then there's two ways. Like, reseeding is probably the gold standard method to put it in clover, but you can also do it through oversown. So generally, look, it does work best doing it earlier in the year compared to autumn. Autumn can be a bit more difficult to keep clover contents good, because it might get a little bit heavy before the winter and you might not get it grazed off at the right cover. So if you get it in earlier in the year, whether it be oversown or reseeding, you have a better chance to keep the covers right and get your post-emergent spray and keep that clover in the sward. For us, we do a lot of it oversown, so we oversow in April and May into good fertile fields that have a relatively open base, and we use an Einbach machine to it's like a tine harrow with a broadcast air seeder on top of it, and we essentially roll it then after that, and it's all about keeping the covers low. So we're generally going into the field oversown fields maybe every 2 weeks, just to keep that pre-grazing herbage mass low, so that the light can get to that young clover plant or clover seedling. Otherwise, it does tend to get smothered out if you let it get up to heavier covers in its first year. So that's one method you could use.
And it's really focusing on a percentage of the farm, Peter. It's obviously not going to be the whole farm. It's starting off.
No, absolutely. Like, if you're doing oversown, you can only do like 2 or 3 paddocks each year, because you can't keep all your paddocks at an extremely low herbage mass. It's too difficult to do. So it's focused on 2 or 3 paddocks each year. So we generally do about 15 to 20%, about 15% say of the farm will be oversown, I'd say, for us, and then we reseed about 5 to 10% of the farm each year as well.
That's great. Thanks, Peter. I suppose you focused a lot there on the importance of infrastructure, which is so critical for managing clover, but also, Nikki, you also mentioned, the importance for good grass utilisation. Why is good infrastructure so critical on a farm?
Yeah, well, we talk about having to go into grass at the right time so that we can come out at the right time. And to do that, you have to have control over stock. So infrastructure, like, it doesn't have to be, I think sometimes we hear infrastructure and we think expensive roadways and lots of money and big investments, but like, even small things like reels and pigtails and splitting maybe a bigger field into 2, potentially small things like moving a water trough from the corner of a field, investing in it could be as little as a couple of 100 meters of pipe across the farm to move 2 or 3 water troughs. That could potentially, instead of having one grazing area in a big field, you could increase that up to 3 or 4. Small things like this to allow you to be constantly grazing the right grass, rather than sort of ranching cattle for long periods of time where the control over the grass and the stock just can't be had. So yeah, like, it's basic enough things to get started. Obviously, the better you get at it, you can divide paddocks smaller and smaller as you wish, but a few bits of basic infrastructure will go a long way on any beef farm.
So for listeners that aren't able to attend today, and for farmers that are here, what practical take-home messages can they implement back on their own farm after attending the demonstration?
Yeah, so like that in terms of just general grassland management, or introducing clover into your swards. It's basic infrastructure to be able to control when and where you graze, your grazing management, and that includes not only sort of making a plan for where you're grazing, but you have to be, particularly this time of the year where grass growth is variable and it can change very suddenly, like with the hot week we had last week. It's getting out on farm and sort of keeping track of what's happening on your farm. And then the biggest one is, once you have all that in place, you need to actually take action and react to things. Like if growth suddenly takes off, it's all well and good knowing that, but going in and doing something to sort of react to it and make the best decision possible for your cattle is the big one. So yeah, basic infrastructure, keeping on top of your grazing management out on the farm, and then make decisions. And they're not always going to be right. Everyone makes mistakes, and you might say you don't need to take out a paddock, and maybe a week later you go, geez, I should have taken that one out, or you take one out and you run a bit tight. But it's all a learning curve, and you just have to start that sort of process.
That's great. Thanks very much, Nikki, and thanks very much, Peter, and well done on this demonstration here today.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.
That's all from this bonus BEEF 2026 episode, and my thanks to Peter and Nikki for joining me on the show. The full details of the booklet from BEEF 2026 is available on the Teagasc website. Check out this week's regular episode, focus on dairy beef update for the weeks ahead. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.